The purpose of today's debate is to gain a better understanding of why up to 2 million people have felt compelled to participate in mass popular protests in Hong Kong, to consider how regressive changes in China have created a storm of anxiety, why the UK has a moral and a legal obligation to stand with its people, and how the international community, including the Commonwealth, can provide guarantees to Hong Kong that will give its people an insurance policy of security and solidarity. On over 20 occasions over the past year, I've highlighted the weakening of the guarantees contained in the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration, which is, of course, an international treaty, and the disturbing erosion of two systems, one country, along with highlighting the changes in China that have caused such apprehension in Hong Kong. The Joint Declaration, through the Basic Law, enshrines the fundamental principles of the rule of law, democracy, human rights and free speech. Not just a treaty, but for Hong Kong's people, a way of life now placed gravely at risk. What began as a rejection of Beijing's erosion of the territory's basic law and Carrie Lam's unjust extradition bill has become a broader fight about Hong Kong's autonomy and very future. It's hard to disagree with the proposition that Hong Kong is the new frontline in a clash of value systems. In the aftermath of the 1997 handover, Beijing did uphold one country, two systems. But in the last few years, both Hong Kong's freedom and trust have been undermined and eroded in an increasingly dramatic way. The final straw was Beijing's attempt to compromise the judicial system. The people of Hong Kong are well aware of how the Chinese courts administer justice. In 2018, according to the Wall Street Journal, in Jiangsu province, the courts acquitted just 43 people, while convicting 96,271. And they're the ones who actually are given a trial, unlike Lam Wing-Ki, a bookseller in Hong Kong for 20 years, abducted and incarcerated for 8 months, and whom I met in Taiwan last month. He told me that highly placed Communist Party officials bought books from him. Without irony, he said his bestsellers, including George Orwell's Animal Farm and 1984. The Chinese authorities told Mr. Lam, if we say you have committed a crime, you have committed a crime. Denied all contact with his family and left in degrading conditions, he contemplated suicide. My Lord's belief in the rule of law has been further compromised by Carrie Lam's unenforceable ban on face masks and her decision to invoke emergency powers, always a harbinger of autocracy and the latest in a long list of blunders. Amnesty accuses the Hong Kong police of points to an alarming pattern of reckless and indiscriminate tactics, to beatings and to torture. Dominic Raab has called the use of force as being disproportionate, with calls for an independent inquiry. The brutality of China's agents was underlined last week when Jimmy Shan, a leading voice for democracy, was viciously attacked by 5 hammer-wielding assailants. My Lords, you will never create a harmonious and law-abiding society by using agents provocateurs, tear gas, iron bars and live ammunition. Shooting teenagers is no solution. The rule of law is not ruled by law, it's simply inflammatory. If all this leads to diplomats issuing a formal warning to businesses in the region, there will be a flight of capital. Beijing would therefore be far wiser to seek dialogue, to seek compromise, rather than killing the goose and the golden egg, China's most profitable financial centre. Over these recent months, I've asked about expulsion of journalists, the banning of political parties, and have worked with Hong Kong Watch, of which I'm a patron, and I particularly thank Luke de Pulford and Ben Rogers for their work and for bringing to Westminster the Umbrella Movement's founders, Nathan Law and Joshua Wong, both of whom are totally committed to peaceful, non-violent protest, but were jailed, with Nathan disqualified from the legislature. During this debate, we must discuss what the future holds for young people like them and for the city's courageous people. 173 members of both houses have pressed the Foreign Secretary to lead an international initiative to guarantee second citizenship. The Noble Lord, Lord Popat, will say more about this later, and I'll refer to the position of BNO passport holders. But I think it would be helpful to the debate if, when the Noble Lord the Minister comes to reply, he could tell us exactly how many people he believes are currently BNO passport holders. But we'll also hear today from many Noble Lords with a great love of Hong Kong and its people, not least the Noble Lord, Lord Patton of Barnes, and my noble friend, Lord Wilson of Tillyorn, and from many others with incredible knowledge about Hong Kong and about China. My own Hong Kong connections began as a student volunteer, teaching English to families who'd settled in Liverpool, home to one of Britain's oldest Chinese communities. They had escaped from the Cultural Revolution. One of their descendants is my goddaughter. But Liverpool was also the birthplace of William Gladstone, a vociferous opponent of the appalling opium trade, which he said was at variance with justice. The Opium Wars led in 1842 to the Treaty of Nanking, to the opening of the 5 treaty ports to foreign merchants, and the ceding, of course, of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong island, to the British Empire. It was in 1980, as a young Liverpool MP, I first visited Hong Kong, and I subsequently went to Shanghai. There I secretly met persecuted Christians whose bishop, Cardinal Ignatius Kung, had languished for 30 years in Chinese jails. And in 1979 then, it was against this backdrop that Margaret Thatcher had to negotiate with Deng Xiaoping the restitution of Hong Kong. In 1982, Deng told her, I quote, "I could walk in and take the whole lot this afternoon." In a characteristic retort, the Prime Minister replied, "There's nothing I could do to stop you, but the eyes of the world would now know what China is like." And that is equally true today, my lords. The eyes of the world must stay trained on Hong Kong. Last week, the free world did just that when the United States House of Representatives passed bipartisan 4 pieces of legislation, 3 of which were related to Hong Kong. But our eyes, my lords, have seen other things too. 30 years ago in Tiananmen Square, we saw the Red Army massacre 10,000 pro-democracy demonstrators, many of them young. We've also seen how Xi Jinping has been turning the clock back on Deng Xiaoping's welcome attempts at reform. In June, on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen, the regime said that the brutal suppression of those pro-democracy demonstrations had been good for society, describing it as a vaccination against political instability. And we've also seen how Xi is repressing political dissent and religious belief. The assault on religion in China is the most systematic since the lethal Cultural Revolution, when churches were desecrated, looted, turned into storerooms and factories. Religious were incarcerated, tortured, some burnt alive, some sent to labour camps, with Christians publicly paraded through cities and towns, forced to wear cylindrical hats detailing their crime of belief. Over the summer, I met Hong Kong's Cardinal Zen and Martin Lee, founder of Hong Kong's Democratic Party, a meeting which the Chinese authorities tried to stop. I heard fears that religious persecution will be visited again on Hong Kong. President Xi may not yet have a little red book, but he has replaced the 10 Commandments with his sayings. In addition, religious freedom, churches, mosques and temples have been shut or demolished, leaders imprisoned, surveillance cameras installed. The European Parliament described the situation, I quote, as a new low. Writing about surveillance, George Orwell famously said in 1984, "Big Brother is watching you," but not, my lords, not just watching. Orwell said, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever, and that the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their own history. For Buddhists in Tibet and Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, his Sinicization program seeks to do just that, to ensure that their history is obliterated. Over 40 of the Uyghur cemeteries have been destroyed and bones of ancestors remains scattered. At the All-Party Party Group for Uyghurs, of which I'm Vice Chairman, we heard disturbing evidence about the vile incarceration of 1 million Uyghur Muslims to be re-educated, brainwashed, intimidated and reprogrammed. We've also seen disturbing evidence suggestive of why Uyghur DNA is tested Falun Gong practitioners told a parliamentary hearing how bodies have been turned into a source of forced human organ harvesting. An independent tribunal, chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, concluded that there is incontrovertible evidence that this has happened. We'll hear more about this from my noble friends, Lady Finlay and Baroness Gray-Thompson. The Minister has the names of Chinese officials involved in this and in other forms of persecution. Perhaps he'll tell the House whether Magnitsky powers will be used to pursue those culpable. Ministers and their officials need to be alive to China's use of censorship, economic pressure and fear and favour to try and silence criticism and to close the world's eyes to what's happening in Hong Kong. Perry Link, a Princeton academic, describes China's heavy-handed attempts to close and censor debates as, I quote, the anaconda in the chandelier. But the anaconda isn't just in the chandelier, it is the chandelier, my lords. President Xi's great firewall and dystopian cyber sovereignty is entrenched by laws which can result in job loss, years-long prison sentences or exile. This isn't the free air of Hong Kong with unimpeded access to the internet, and Hong Kong has been watching all of this with alarm. In 2008, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the late Liu Xiaobo, along with hundreds of others, published their pro-democracy and human rights manifesto, Charter 08. He received a sentence of 11 years imprisonment. He wrote that his crime was to oppose systems of government that are dictatorships or monopolies. Opposition, he said, is not equivalent to subversion. He looked to the day when different values, ideas, beliefs and political views can both compete with each other and peacefully coexist. That same thought was captured in the 1984 Joint Declaration, which said Hong Kong's lifestyle shall remain unchanged for 50 years. This included freedom of the person, the press of assembly, of association, of demonstration and of belief. But we've watched with dismay as promises have been broken, legislators disqualified, mass arrests have taken place, employees dismissed, and live ammunition replace any attempt to cultivate dialogue or to find solutions. And we've seen China tell the UK, the only other signatory to a legally binding joint declaration, that we have no right to express a view. We have seen China say that the 1984 treaty is null and void, quotes, a historical document with no practical significance, no binding effect on the Chinese central government management of Hong Kong. So what must we do? The United Kingdom has a unique moral, historic duty to bring together the international community in defence of the rule of law, democracy, free speech and human rights of two systems, one country. We should form an international contact group of like-minded nations to coordinate an international response. And at next year's Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference in Kigali, countries should be urged to give all Hong Kong citizens an insurance policy of second citizenship and a place of abode to be available if China continues to resile on the joint declaration. I chaired a hearing about British national overseas BNO passport holders, including former police officers and the 250 military who served the Crown. Their plight was said by the late Lord Ashdown to be worse than Windrush. In a letter to me this week, the Home Secretary says that the government have no plans to amend the law. BNO passport holders are vulnerable, and so are others with proven UK links. Perhaps the Minister will confirm that there's no legal impediment to us giving full British citizenship to those at risk and say whether we'll help to forge a comprehensive international solution for the people of Hong Kong. Nobody wants anyone to have to leave Hong Kong. People are more likely to stay if they know that there will be ways to leave if the need should arise. And my lords, we should also join the United States in introducing legislation to strengthen the monitoring of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the Magnitsky sanctions and the enactment of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act to hold perpetrators to account when it's been breached. And we should ensure that after Brexit, no free trade agreement is made with Hong Kong or China without a robust clause tied to the freedoms guaranteed in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Trade law is critical and more enforceable than other forms of international law. To conclude, my lords, the answers to Beijing's fears about separatism and its desire for unity and a stable future are to be found in the free air of Hong Kong, not in the Uyghur re-education camps of Xinjiang, or in a repeat of the massacre at Tiananmen, or through surveillance cameras or repression. As Margaret Thatcher rightly said, the eyes of the world are on Hong Kong. We must stand in solidarity with them. In our day, we must neither avert our eyes or silence our voices. I beg to you.